Random House Audiobooks presents The Lost World by Michael Crichton. Read for you by Anthony Heald.
The Lost World. The late 20th century has witnessed a remarkable growth in scientific interest in the subject of extinction. It is hardly a new subject. Baron Georges Cuvier had first demonstrated that species became extinct back in 1786, not long after the American Revolution. Thus, the fact of extinction had been accepted by scientists for nearly three-quarters of a century before Darwin put forth his theory of evolution. And after Darwin, the many controversies that swirled around his theory did not often concern issues of extinction. On the contrary, extinction was generally considered as unremarkable as a car running out of gas. However, beginning in the 1970s, two developments began to focus attention on extinction in a new way. The first was the recognition that human beings were now very numerous and were altering the planet at a very rapid rate, eliminating traditional habitats, clearing the rainforest, polluting air and water, perhaps even changing global climate. In the process, many animal species were becoming extinct. Some scientists cried out in alarm, others were quietly uneasy. How fragile was the Earth's ecosystem? Was the human species engaged in behavior that would eventually lead to its own extinction? No one was sure. Since nobody had ever bothered to study extinction in an organized way, there was little information about rates of extinction in other geological eras. So scientists began to look closely at extinction in the past, hoping to answer anxieties about the present. The second development concerned new knowledge about the death of the dinosaurs. It had long been known that all dinosaur species had become extinct in a relatively short time at the end of the Cretaceous era, approximately 65 million years ago. Exactly how quickly these extinctions occurred was a subject of long-standing debate. Some paleontologists believed they had been catastrophically swift. Others felt the dinosaurs had died out more gradually, over a period of 10,000 to 10 million years, hardly a rapid event. Then in 1980, physicist Luis Alvarez and three co-workers discovered high concentrations of the element iridium in rocks from the end of the Cretaceous and the start of the Tertiary, the so-called KT boundary. The Cretaceous was shorthanded as K to avoid confusion with the Cambrian and other geological periods. Iridium is rare on Earth, but abundant in meteors. Alvarez's team argued that the presence of so much iridium in rocks at the KT boundary suggested that a giant meteorite many miles in diameter had collided with the Earth at that time. They theorized that the resulting dust and debris had darkened the skies, inhibited photosynthesis, killed plants and animals, and ended the reign of the dinosaurs. This dramatic theory captured the media and public imagination. It began a controversy which continued for many years. Where was the crater from this meteor? Various candidates were proposed. There were 5 major periods of extinction in the past. Had meteors caused them all? Was there a 26 million year cycle of catastrophe? Was the planet, even now, awaiting another devastating impact? After more than a decade, these questions remained unanswered. The debate raged on until August 1993, when at a weekly seminar of the Santa Fe Institute, an iconoclastic mathematician named Ian Malcolm announced that none of these questions mattered, and that the debate over a meteoric impact was a frivolous and irrelevant speculation. Malcolm was 40 years old and a familiar figure at the Santa Fe Institute. He had been one of the early pioneers in chaos theory, but his promising career had been disrupted by a severe injury during a trip to Costa Rica. Malcolm had, in fact, been reported dead in several newscasts. Dressed entirely in black, leaning on a cane, Malcolm gave the impression of severity. He was known within the Institute for his unconventional analysis and his tendency to pessimism. His talk that August, entitled "Life at the Edge of Chaos," was typical of his thinking. "Consider the numbers. Malcolm said, leaning on the podium, staring forward at his audience. On our planet, there are currently 50 million species of plants and animals. We think that is a remarkable diversity. Yet it is nothing compared to what has existed before. The truth, Malcolm said, was that life on Earth was marked by a continuous, steady rate of extinction. By and large, the average lifespan of a species was 4 million years. For mammals, it was 1 million years. Then the species vanished. So the real pattern was one of species rising, flourishing, and dying out in a few million years. On average, one species a day had become extinct throughout the history of life on Earth. But why? He asked. What leads to the rise and decline of Earth species in a 4-million-year life cycle? One answer is that we do not recognize how continuously active our planet is. Just the last 50,000 years of geological blink of an eye, the rainforests have severely contracted, then expanded again. As recently as 10,000 years ago, when there were human hunters on the American continent, an ice pack extended as far down as New York City. Many animals became extinct during that time. So most of Earth's history shows animals living and dying against a very active background. That probably explains 90% of extinctions. If the seas dry up or become more salty, then of course ocean plankton will all die. But complex animals, like dinosaurs, are another matter, because complex animals have insulated themselves literally and figuratively against such changes. Why do complex animals die out? Why don't they adjust? What I wish to propose is that complex animals become extinct, not because of a change in their physical adaptation to their environment, but because of their behavior. I would suggest that the latest thinking in chaos theory or nonlinear dynamics provides tantalizing hints to how this happens. It suggests to us that behavior of complex animals can change very rapidly and not always for the better. It suggests that behavior can cease to be responsive to the environment and instead lead to decline and death. It suggests that animals may stop adapting. Is this what happened to the dinosaurs? Is this the true cause of their disappearance? We may never know. At the back of the room, a pale hand went up, waving impatiently. Malcolm frowned, visibly annoyed. "You had a question?" Malcolm asked. From the back of the room, a young man in his early 30s stood. "Actually," the man said, "an observation." The speaker was dark and thin, dressed in khaki shirt and shorts, precise in his movements and manner. Malcolm recognized him as a paleontologist from Berkeley named Levine, who was spending the summer at the Institute. Malcolm had never spoken to him, but he knew his reputation. Levine was generally agreed to be the best paleobiologist of his generation, perhaps the best in the world. But most people at the Institute disliked him, finding him pompous and arrogant. "During the Cretaceous, dinosauria were widely distributed across the planet," Levine said. "We have found their remains on every continent and in every climatic zone, even in the Antarctic. Now, if their extinction was really the result of their behavior, and not the consequence of a catastrophe, or a disease, or a change in plant life, or any of the other broad-scale explanations that have been proposed, then it seems to me highly unlikely that they all changed their behavior at the same time, everywhere. And that, in turn, means that there may well be some remnants of these animals still alive on Earth, somewhere in an isolated spot on the planet." "You're talking about a lost world," Malcolm said, and heads in the room nodded knowingly. Scientists at the Institute had developed a shorthand for referring to common evolutionary scenarios. These were well-defined ways of thinking about evolution, but they were all— "No," Levine said, stubbornly. "I am speaking literally." "Then you're badly deluded," Malcolm said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. He turned away from the audience and walked slowly to the blackboard. "Now, if we consider the implications of the edge of chaos, we may begin by asking ourselves, what is the minimal unit of life?" At the back of the room, Levine stared for a moment. Then, reluctantly, he sat down and began to make notes. The lecture ended, Malcolm hobbled across the open courtyard of the Institute shortly after noon. Walking beside him was Sarah Harding, a young field...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?